In the book of Genesis, it is written that Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, rose to a position second only to the king in Egypt, and saved his brothers and father Jacob during a famine. This time, I would like to summarize and convey the story of Joseph as written in the Bible.
Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons and made him a robe of many colors. His brothers, jealous of him, could not speak peaceably to him. Joseph had a dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." This made his brothers hate him even more. Joseph had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "I had another dream. And this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Jacob said to Joseph, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he said to him, "I will." When Joseph arrived, his brothers stripped him of his robe, seized him, and threw him into a cistern. Later, a caravan of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, and Joseph's brothers sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. They took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. The Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard.
Joseph, still young, couldn't gauge his brothers' hearts. Also, Jacob's favoritism towards Joseph likely didn't soothe his brothers' hearts.
When Joseph was taken to Egypt, an Egyptian named Potiphar, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites. Joseph was loved by his master and entrusted with all his possessions. After these events, Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph and said to him, "Come to bed with me." He refused and said to Potiphar's wife, "How could I sin against God?" One day, when Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside, Potiphar's wife caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. She then falsely accused him to her husband, saying, "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me." Potiphar's master became angry and had Joseph thrown into the king's prison, where the king's prisoners were confined.
Joseph originally had a keen intellect and seemed to possess the ability to manage all things. In addition to this, he faithfully kept God's word.
The cupbearer not only poured wine, but also served as a taster.
The Lord showed favor to Joseph, and he became responsible for overseeing all that was done in the prison. After these events, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the same prison, both had dreams on the same night. They said to Joseph, "We both had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph said to them, "Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer said, "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me. On the vine, there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. I squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and put the cup in his hand." Joseph said to him, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Please remember me and show kindness to me, mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison." Then the chief baker said to Joseph, "In my dream, there were 3 baskets of bread on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph answered, "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole. And the birds will eat away your flesh." On the 3rd day, he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker.
Both the chief baker and the chief cupbearer held crucial positions dealing with what entered the king's mouth. Because even a slight mistake could lead to the ability to poison the king. They would not have been trusted in those roles without confidence. Though it's not detailed, it can be inferred that some mistake made by one of them was deemed to be an assassination attempt.
As years passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He saw 7 sleek, well-fed cows coming up out of the Nile and grazing among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside the sleek, well-fed cows on the riverbank. And the ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek, well-fed cows. Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had another dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. There was no one in Egypt who could interpret the dreams, so the chief cupbearer said, "There is a Hebrew who can interpret dreams." Joseph was then summoned from prison and brought before the king. When the king recounted his dreams, Joseph said, "There will be 7 years of abundance in Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. I advise storing up food during the years of abundance." The king was amazed and said, "We have never seen such a wise man. Let Joseph be in charge of managing all of Egypt." So, the king appointed Joseph to the second highest position and entrusted everything to him. Indeed, the 7 years of abundance came. Joseph stored up plenty during those years in preparation for the famine.
It seems that the famine had spread throughout the entire world.
The famine also affected the land of Canaan, and Jacob's family faced food shortages. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, so he said to his sons, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Jacob kept Benjamin at home and sent his other sons to Egypt to buy grain. When Joseph's brothers came before him in Egypt, they bowed down with their faces to the ground. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, he spoke to them harshly and said, "Where do you come from?" They answered, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." Joseph accused them, saying, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." The brothers replied fearfully, "We are 12 brothers, sons of one man. We have come to buy food for our family. We are not spies." But Joseph insisted, "Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified, and that you may not die." So, Simeon was left behind in Egypt as a hostage.
The term spy suggests the countries intended to attack Egypt, which had stored grain, to seize it.
Joseph's brothers returned to Canaan with grain. When one of them opened his sack, he found his silver in it, the silver he had given to Joseph. He said to his brothers, "My silver has been returned, here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank and they turned to each other trembling. They said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men, we are not spies.' We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan." Then their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me."
Jacob did not understand why Joseph was so concerned about Benjamin, the youngest. Jacob loved Rachel the most, and when Rachel had difficulty bearing children, Joseph was born. Then Benjamin was born, at the cost of Rachel's life. These two were very precious to Jacob.
As the famine grew worse and the grain they had brought from Egypt was almost gone, Jacob said to his sons, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said, "The man was serious when he warned us, 'You won't see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy more food.'" but if you don't let him go, we won't go either." Then Judah said, "Send the boy along with me and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." Israel said, "If it must be, then do this: put some of the best products of the land in your bags. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once." So the men took the gifts and doubled the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph.
The Egyptians would not eat with the Hebrews.
The brothers brought to Joseph's house worried about what kind of punishment they would receive. They said to the steward, "Last time, the silver we found in our sacks was returned to us by mistake. This time, we have brought double the silver." The steward reassured them, saying, "Don't worry. You have nothing to fear." They were then seated at Joseph's table to eat. Joseph asked them, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They replied, "Your servant our father is well, he is still alive." When Joseph saw Benjamin, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" And they said, "Yes." Overcome with emotion, Joseph hurried to his room and wept. After washing his face, he returned and ordered, "Serve the meal." The brothers were surprised to find themselves seated at the table in order of their ages.
Joseph pretended not to understand Hebrew, but he listened to everything his brothers were saying.
As they were about to leave, Joseph instructed his steward, "Put their silver back into their sacks along with the money they paid for the grain, and place my silver cup in the youngest brother's sack." Before they had gone far, the steward caught up with them and said, "Why have you repaid good with evil? Why did you take my master's silver cup?" The brothers replied, "Why does my lord accuse us of such a thing? We have brought back double the silver this time." The steward declared, "The one in whose possession the cup is found will become my slave, the rest of you will be free from blame." When the steward searched their sacks, he found the cup in Benjamin's sack. So they returned to Joseph's house and fell to the ground before him. Joseph said, "Only the one in whose possession the cup was found will become my slave. The rest of you may go back to your father in peace." Then Judah approached him and said, "Please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers."
Judah had once lived apart from his brothers. During that time, God restored Judah's faith and regarded him as one who followed God's will. Judah's offer to be a substitute was a manifestation of his growth.
Joseph instructed the nearby attendants to leave him alone with his brothers. When they were alone, he wept loudly and said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were stunned and unable to speak. Joseph said to them, "Come closer and see for yourselves. I am Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." He continued, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. The famine has been in the land for 2 years now, and for 5 more years there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt." Then Joseph embraced Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And they kissed each other, and wept together. Afterward, Joseph's brothers talked with him, and they left for Canaan, praising and thanking God for his great work, and for the provision he had made for them through Joseph.
It has been 13 years since Joseph came to Egypt. Although there were some resemblances in his appearance. The Egyptians wore makeup, so his brothers probably didn't recognize Joseph right away.
Upon returning to Canaan, the brothers immediately reported about Joseph to Jacob. Jacob rejoiced upon hearing that Joseph, whom he had thought was dead, was alive. And he was also delighted that Simeon and Benjamin had returned safely. Jacob and his family set out for Egypt to live there. Along the way, Jacob had a vision. In the vision, God said, "Do not be afraid. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." Eventually, they arrived in Egypt and made preparations to settle in the land of Goshen. As soon as Joseph saw Jacob, he embraced his father's neck and wept for a long time.
God also appeared to Jacob, and he realized that everything was part of God's plan. God told him that eventually they would be led back to the land of Canaan. This would happen 430 years later. Joseph died in Egypt and was embalmed. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, Joseph's embalmed body went with them. The above is the story of Joseph as written in the Bible. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel.